reporting. Well, ahead of National Carers Week, which begins on Sunday, employers are being urged to cut some slack for workers with unpaid caring responsibilities at home. Earlier today, I spoke to the Assistant Minister for Social Services, Mitch Fifield, who was at today's launch in Canberra. Mitch Fifield, welcome to Capitol Hill.
Thanks, Andrew.
You've just been involved in the launch of some TV commercials ahead of Carers Week. What is the message that needs to be given to those millions of Australians who, through unpaid work, are looking after their fellow family members?
Well, the message is to be care aware for the community. There are about 2.6 million family carers in Australia. The value that's been put on the efforts that they undertake is about $40 billion. There's no way the community could ever hope to replicate what they do, but it's important that we're aware that in every workplace in the country there's likely to be a carer, and we're encouraging people through Carer Week to take a break for carers, to have a morning tea, have an afternoon tea, to pause and to let carers know in the workplace that they have the support of their co-workers.
The reality for many people is that may not be possible. Is there more for the government to do to help carers?
There's more to do for carers, and I think particularly for younger carers, that there are over 300,000 carers below the age of 24, and they typically have to juggle their family caring responsibilities, work and study. Inevitably, something has to give, and all too often it's study that gives, which is why the government is going to put in place some young carer bursaries, up to 150 bursaries, up to the value of $10,000, to make life a bit easier for those young carers. But sure, there is more that needs to be done.
If we can turn to a related issue, the National Disability Insurance Scheme, will the Abbott government be sticking to what has been promised in the election?
Yes, we undertook before the election that we would honour the bilateral agreements between the Commonwealth and the states and territories.
So all the timeframes will remain?
So honour the timeframes and also the announced spending. The NDIS is something that should be beyond partisan politics. We made a point of that in opposition, and I hope that the new opposition will treat the NDIS the way that we did. It's just too important to be mired in day-to-day politics.
But you won't necessarily stick to some of the locations that Labor was talking about for trials?
Well, there are a series of launch sites which commenced in the middle of this year. Some additional launch sites will start in the middle of next year. They are the launch sites which have been agreed between the federal government and the states and territories. It was disappointing that during the election campaign that Labor sought to play politics with the NDIS. They did some phony announcements. They put out some press releases to say that here are a series of locations which will next benefit from the NDIS. That press release, those press releases had no status. There had been no negotiation, no discussion with the states and territories. It was a stunt. Launch sites beyond what we currently have will be determined by negotiation between the federal government and the states and territories. But the good news is that every part of Australia will get the National Disability Insurance Scheme.
Is it necessary to change the name? What will that cost?
Oh, look, it'll cost in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. The reason that we're looking to change the name is because it hasn't been embraced, the name Disability Care, by people with disabilities. Many people with disabilities find the name patronising. Australians with disability don't so much want to be cared for, but they want to be supported into independence. And we also think it's important to revert to the original name, National Disability Insurance Scheme, to underpin the insurance principles of the scheme. But we're not going to make the mistake of the previous government who wasted tens of millions of dollars rebranding the scheme as Disability Care. They blew that money, they confused people, and they didn't convey any information about the scheme through those. We're going to take a no frills and low cost approach to changing the name. We're going to use the existing printed stock. We're going to take our time. That way it won't cost millions and millions to change the name, which it otherwise would have.
If we can turn to your role as the Manager of Government Business in the Senate, Presumably you were involved in the preference deals that were made in the lead up to the election. Have you had the chance to speak to senators like Helen Kroger who've missed out, and what have you had to say to her?
Well, preference arrangements are matters for the party organisation. As a senator, I wasn't involved in that, but yes, I've caught up with Helen Kroger. She's understandably disappointed. She's a good contributor, and we will miss her from 1 July next year.
Another Victorian, Sophie Mirabella, does she have a role within the coalition now that she isn't in the parliament?
Look, Sophie will remain an active member of the Liberal Party, I have no doubt, and I look forward to Sophie's contribution in the future. She's still someone who has a big future in the Liberal Party.
If we could turn to the question of parliamentary entitlements, you're a regular participant in the Polly Peddle tour around Australia. Do you see...
But no lycra. I don't don lycra.
Which, look, I think we can possibly get you to impress that on your leader as well. But if we can turn to the question of entitlements, is it necessary for people other than the leader to look at possibly paying back their entitlements?
Well, the Polly Peddle is a great exercise in community engagement. For the past 2 years, all of the money, or the bulk of the money raised by the Polly Peddle has gone to Carers Australia, in excess of $500,000. Next year, the Polly Peddle will also be dedicated to raising funds for Carers Australia. And at each stop along the way, Mr Abbott and myself meet with carers, meet with people with disability, meet with the organisations that support them. It's a very important opportunity to hear direct from carers and from people with disability. It's a good thing for a party leader to do, it's a good thing for a Prime Minister to do, and it's a good thing for me as a Minister to do. Should
that be the standard, that if you don't carry out parliamentary business while you're on a tour like Polly Peddle, then you shouldn't claim for it?
Look, the Polly Peddle is an important community event, and I myself claimed travel allowance for it, as is appropriate. But look, the rules are there. It's incumbent upon all members of Parliament to follow the guidelines, and where there is an error, then money should be repaid.
Would you like to see politicians perhaps look at cheaper alternatives for travel, as suggested by your fellow Senator Nick Xenophon?
Well, I think we should all look to minimise costs wherever we can, whether it be in terms of
economy fares.
Well, whether it be in terms of our travel and accommodation arrangements, we should look to be sensible and reasonable. And I'm taking the same approach as we were discussing earlier to the name change for the National Disability Insurance Scheme, reverting back to NDIS. If it was pushed and done in a short time frame, it'd cost millions. But we're looking to minimise costs wherever we can.
And what about overall scrutiny? Does there need to be perhaps a greater strengthening of the arrangements that are in place now?
Well, I think it's important to recognise that there are already some important accountability mechanisms in place. All members and senators' expenses, be they office or travel, are tabled in the Parliament every 6 months. And are provided there in quite some detail, and I think that's an important accountability mechanism. There's also the opportunity of Senate estimates hearings 3 times a year, when the officers of the Department of Finance, who look after members and senators' entitlements, are there to be quizzed and to provide updates as to members and senators' expenditure. So there are some important accountability processes in place, but we've all got to follow the guidelines, and where there's an error, money should be paid back.
And we've been asking every politician this week, have you seen the need to repay anything in the past few weeks?
No, I haven't, but it is not an uncommon thing for members of Parliament from time to time where there's an error for monies to be repaid. But there are sometimes errors on the side of the Department of Finance as well, and it's important for both sides to make sure that they're square.
Mitch Fifield, thanks for joining Capitol Hill.
Thanks indeed.